society at large tells you not to give to individuals. It's like, oh, it's dangerous. They'll use the money poorly. It's bad. But I think institutions want that meme out there because they want the money. Top tier firms wanted to come in and say like, hey, I want a bigger slice of this cake. And not only do I want a big slice of this cake, I want to cut you guys out of your slice that you already have. Employers started leaning on the proxy of, oh, do you have a college degree, as a way to keep them from getting sued from, potential employees or just people they've interviewed, as a way to create this barrier between them and the assessment process. And
Welcome, everybody, to the Robert Meets World podcast, the program where we dive into all manner of the metaphysical to the practical and everything in between. Today, I am exhilarated once again to be bringing one of my previous guests on my old podcast back to this new podcast, this new program. Her name is Danielle Strachman, and I hope I pronounced that right, Danielle.
That's great. You got it.
She is the co-founder and general partner at 1517 Fund, the premier pre-seed venture capital firm backing ambitious young people working on big ideas. With the tagline of backing dropouts working on hard problems and sci-fi scientists at the earliest stages of their companies, Danielle has been working at 1517 for approximately 10 years, backing bright minds pursuing ambitious work. Previously, she worked as an early program director at the Thiel Fellowship, a grant-based program offering $100,000 for ambitious students to stop out of college for a year to pursue something ambitious that they wanted to work on their own. This program has yielded fellows such as Dylan Fields, the now co-founder of Figma, Austin Russel, CEO of Luminar Technologies, Vitalik Buterin, the co-founder of the Ethereum blockchain, Laura Deming, the co-founder of the Longevity Fund, and more. Prior to this, Danielle worked at the K-8 charter school entitled Innovations Academy in San Diego, where she worked on designing programming as well as operating the school as a principal. And she is still on the board of the company and the school today. Unlike most venture capitalists, Danielle and her partner, Michael Gibson, have found themselves in all manner of wacky situations. This is described in depth in Michael Gibson's book, Paper Built on Fire, where the two have found themselves catching power naps under hackathon tables and hosting youth-filled meetups with conversations ranging from interplanetary physics to garage bioscience. In this episode, I want to catch up with Danielle to see what 1517 has been up to lately in the past 5 years since we first spoke, and discussing some of the premier and frontier problems that people are working on. So, Danielle, with that, welcome to the program.
Oh, man. I hope I can live into that intro. That was incredible. I was like, premier fund working with young people. I was like, I'll take it. That sounds great. Really great to be with you again, Robert. And one of the charms of our work is these cycles that happen of working with people over time. You mentioned Dylan from the Thiel Fellowship, and he's an LP in 1517 now. And so we have these cycles of working with people over time, and I feel that way right now, working with you on the podcast of like, oh yeah, we've done this before, we're doing it again, because things change and evolve over time, and yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Well, I want to start, Danielle, with there was a line in Paper Built on Fire where Michael introduces you as the sort of entrant into the Thiel Fellowship. Now, for the listeners who are familiar with this book, Michael was at the point where he had just met, I guess, Peter Thiel and some of the people working on the foundation, and they sort of realized that they needed somebody operative who had experience in designing programs in order to facilitate this idea of the grant. And at the time, you were at a communal living, digging in the dirt, yep, wondering what happened to your life, or what was going on in your life.
Yeah.
So can we start there with journey into this 1517 in this world?
Sure. Yeah, that was an amazing time. And in fact, the friend that I worked on that community house with messaged me about something the other day, and it's like, oh, Steve, I don't know if he's read the book yet, but I'm like, Steve's in this book. I had moved up to the Bay in 2010. I had hung up my cap being a school principal at Innovations Academy. Myself and my co-founder, Christine Kuglin, founded that school. Took us 2 years to found it and open it. It's a charter school, so it's a public school. And then I was co-director with her for the first 2 years. And she's been director there for the whole time, 16 years, which is really, really amazing. And I love my school. It is both the best and the most challenging thing I've ever done. And sometimes when you start things, you obviously learn a lot about yourself. And one of the things that I learned about myself was that being a school principal was not my calling. I'm still on the board today. But I learned that I really want to work directly with young people. And when you're an administrator, you're working with parents and you're working with the district. And so, I knew it was time for me to make a change. I ended up moving up to the Bay Area. I was dating a guy long distance from San Diego to the Bay. We were going back and forth. And I came up here. I'm in the Bay now still. And I remember, we weren't going to live together to start. And I was looking for places to live. And this was in 2010. And I remember crying because it was so hard to find a place to rent where I thought it was, a reasonable rent. Looking back, it's funny. I found this community living house and they had a room open for $800 a month. And I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be burning through savings. I told myself I was going to take some decompression time from being a school principal. And it's funny, when I look back in hindsight, I gave myself this sandbox. I told myself I'd do a staycation for 6 months. I didn't have any money to travel and go find myself or do that. I was like, I'm going to find myself in the dirt at this community living house where we're going to do like eco gardening and green things. What I also laugh at about this was that I was trying to take a break from having founded something. And then I was the first person to join my friend Steve in building this house together. So we were basically co-founding something. I was like, wow, okay. I was trying to like take a break, but even for me, taking a break still means doing things. My family's like this a lot. I have a lot of energy. My parents have a lot of energy. So the idea of like sitting on a beach or something, like that's not really what we do. But yeah, I lived in this intentional community. And the 6-month sandbox, I think, was really important because it gave me some confidence to say no to things. I think if I hadn't told myself, I'm going to give myself 6 months before I say yes to any sort of line of work, what would have happened is the first thing that came to me, I would have felt like, oh, I need to take this, what an offer, and just go with it. I've worked, basically, in some sense, like half-time to full-time since I was a teenager. And so the idea of burning through savings was very scary. And I also was nervous because, I don't have like traditional tech skills. I wasn't a coder. I don't have like a degree in science, like all of these things. And I didn't know who was going to value my operator skill set of like, hey, this person, not only has like vision and insight, but can like literally put her hands in the dirt. Or, when I founded the charter school, we didn't have money for a janitor. So me and my co-founder were also the janitors. And so it's like, I've scrubbed more toilets than most people that I meet, especially at a VC event. And like, who's the type of person who's going to get like dirty with the work and elbows deep? And I like that operator part of work. I wouldn't want to just be the type of person who espouses, oh, I think the world could look different in this way. And then be like, but I'm not doing anything about it. So I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know who would value those skill sets. I started getting offers from different nonprofits in the area to operate their nonprofits. And I was very flattered. Some of these places were mentors of mine and they were kind of like looking to pass the torch. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so flattered. I feel like I'm supposed to say yes, but I told myself I'd give myself 6 months to not. And so I would say no. And it also some of these things did not, and in fact, none of them fit with my vision of bringing freedom, agency, and autonomy to young people. So when I got a call from Lindy Fishburne at the Thiel Foundation, and her exact words were that she's a very blunt person. She's great. She said, the Thiel Foundation has lost their minds. They're starting this new program and they have nobody running it. I had seen the interview with Peter and Sarah Lacey, and in my like operator, charter school founder brain, I was like, who on earth starts a program and has no one running it? Like, that sounds insane to me. and I interviewed the next week, and I came on the week after that. And so when I look back, I think it was really helpful to say, oh, I'm going to take 6 months to say no to stuff, because when a yes came 3 months in, it was very clear why that would be a yes, and why I would sort of break my commitment to myself to take this time off and all this, because it was such a perfect fit. But if I hadn't given myself that sandbox, I probably would have taken like the first thing and just been like, okay, cool, I have a job here now, I feel more secure and I'm fine. So yeah, that was a really interesting time. And yeah, working in the garden with Steve, and getting this community off the ground and doing community building. I'm a community builder at heart with everything I do. And so figuring out who would be our housemates, and having dinners and having people over, and, you know, co-living and co-housing, and, you know, living in a home with a mission is not something that is, you know, foreign in the Bay Area. Like, this has been going on actually, I mean, since like the 60s and 70s. And so it was interesting to kind of tap into some of that lineage too.
And you brought up this like personal mission, right? To bring freedom, autonomy, and what was the last?
Agency. Yeah, freedom, agency, and autonomy.
Can you speak to us a little bit about how those principles were integrated into Innovations Academy? Because I think that one of the things around that's sort of the thread between, I suppose, all the work you do is this not abrasive towards the education system, but this the friction, would you say, or challenging of existing pedagogies. And for myself, I've always found like Montessori philosophy quite interesting. And I was just curious to hear how some of those principles interweaved into your programming and ideas at Innovations Academy.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that is kind of funny about me is like, I'm very allergic to isms and labels, and saying like I am or we are this thing. And that's true at Innovations Academy as well. We decided like we would take pieces and parts from, you know, different philosophy and pedagogy, and say like, hey, what happens when we like roll, you know, some Montessori, some Reggio Emilio, some tech stuff, like let's do that. Some Waldorf stuff, and like Waldorf and tech don't typically go together. And
can you just define some of those, like Waldorf and Reggiism? Yeah,
sure. So so Waldorf, gosh, how to describe it? And I'm probably not going to do it super justice. But like I would describe like Waldorf education systems as being very sort of like naturally based, in terms of, for example, like a lot of the different props and things they're going to use are going to be made out of real wood. They're not going to use plastics. Like, they're going to try to use things that sort of come from the earth. And like the philosophy has like this sort of like grounded in earth type of principle. Reggio Emilio is an Italian, like, you know, which came out of Italian pedagogy. And it is all about like craft and reverence for both children, but also tool usage. And so like, you know, in a Reggio Emilio classroom, you're going to teach your children how to use the best paint that you can afford to buy for them, and show them how to use it. You're not going to like buy crappy paint and then be like, oh, now we're going to make really nice things. There's like a reverence about learning craft, and using good tools for that craft. Like, these are pieces and parts. Like, these are not necessarily like the baseline philosophy parts, but they're all like really, you know, interesting, and they don't get as much airtime as like Montessori does. I love Montessori. Montessori, I think a lot of people in education are actually philosophers, and they don't really get the like gravitas of, you know, like, oh yeah, like Maria Montessori. No one's like, oh yes, she's a philosopher. Like, she's a philosopher. Like, you read her stuff, she gets really into the human condition, and the reverence that she has for the human condition is unlike anyone else I've ever read. And in fact, I reread part of The Absorbent Mind, which is the first book of hers that I read 25 years ago. And I was rereading it recently, and part of me really wondered. I was like, oh my God, those memes got in my mind like big time. Because she's talking about higher ed too. And how like, oh, this like really doesn't make sense. And, you know, like, we don't need to go this path. And And I was like, oh, wow. I like when I read her the first time, I don't remember picking up on those messages. I remember reading it because I was starting a tutoring business. I was working with homeschoolers, you know, and eventually starting my school. So it was interesting to go back and see like, oh, wow, she has something to say about higher ed as well. And like, I didn't pick that up on the first read, at least not consciously, but I have to wonder, since I read it 25 years ago, how much of that like seeped in and stayed with me through like, you know, the charter school and the Thiel Fellowship, and that was 15, 17.
It's almost like, I mean, if it was we were using something like the Carl Jung universe idea, it's almost like there's individuals who are archetypically attracted to particular ideas that then embody them, and
Yeah.
seeing then how, I guess, some of those ideas attracted you, and then finding yourself in this, what
Yeah.
once, you know, you were that educator role and you're still in that community building, that like
Yeah.
providing, I guess, an alternative path in I don't know if education is the right word, but like almost like life path, right? Because
Yeah.
some of these like kids who are like either highly gifted, where we're talking like people at 14 who are like potentially able to go to university or graduating
Sure.
university. So you integrated some of these ideas into your programming, your ideas, and then you sort of did that for a little bit, was a bit of a grind, a lot of the, what you mentioned, bureaucracy, all these things. You
Yeah.
get the
Yeah.
call for the Thiel Fellowship, and tell us what, you know, what was the, I mean, first of all, I imagine you were kind of like, what is going on?
Yeah, it was first, what is going on? Like, you know, who starts a program and has nobody running it? That was sort of my first thought. And just feeling really excited. Like, wow, this is because I was also sort of struggling with this thing of, okay, I had gone from being a private tutor and working with homeschoolers and loving the like one-to-one impact I was making. But then when I opened the charter school, it was much bigger impact. It was like, okay, maybe I'm not getting that one-on-one time anymore, but like the breadth and the reach, and like, you know, in startup parlance, we'd say the scale of what I was doing was greater. And I really liked that, like feeling into that, like, oh, wow, this is more than. And so I knew what I was looking for next. I was sort of curious of like, I want the next thing to have that like more than feel. And so, you know, as I was, you know, like diving into interviewing and things like that, it was like, wow, this is interesting because I'm going to get the opportunity to work in that one-on-one fashion with people. But like the messaging and the scale of that message is so much greater than anything else that I've ever done. And that's really exciting to me. So it was this perfect fit for me of like, I'm going to get to work with the people I love to work with, like hands on, and have that like real mission and putting something out into the world and having an effect past like the walls of our organization. So that was really, really exciting for me. And it was really exciting for me too, because when I interviewed, it was very clear that it was a tabla rasa, which for me was really great because I didn't want to go in and be viewed as like, oh, this is the ops person who's going to like manage our vision, our being people over here. And like, there's sometimes that separateness. And gosh, I have like whole rants about these types of things, but I'm not going to go on my rant. But I knew that I didn't want that. Like, I knew that, you know, I was going to be bringing really strong like pedagogy and philosophy to this. And I wanted to embed that in everything that we were doing, even in the messaging of what we were doing. And I wanted to be like elbows deep and like just getting in there and building it. And so that was really exciting to see that they viewed this very much as, you know, the opportunity for someone to really like take the reins and go with it, and not like managing someone else's dream.
And it's kind of intriguing. You brought up like this philosophy thing. It was almost like an experiment in, I guess, it was a social experiment, right? To some
Yeah,
extent, you're saying
very
like,
much.
if you allow these folks who, these young people who are very ambitious, very intelligent, the opportunity to give them resources and
Yep.
see what they can do. Not that they, you know, they stop out of college. The idea was like they take break
Yeah.
and then just see what they can come up with. And that experiment, you know, has yielded some of these
Yep.
individuals, you know, that I listed at the beginning of this program. And so through that experience, you and Michael kind of acquired this, oh, I don't know, have a great word for it, like not like a checklist, but a sort of a intuitive feeling for these high potential
Sure.
individuals.
Yep.
And Michael listed it in his book, and unfortunately I don't have the list, but it was things like
hyperfluency is a big one for us. There's like 8 to 10 of them. But yeah, there's
Dyson Sphere Friday.
Oh yeah, yes, Friday. It's fun. That's funny you mentioned that one. I'm going to talk to my friend Rob tomorrow where that trait comes from. This friend Rob, like a lot of things that we come up with at 1517 come from actual experience. It's not just like we're bloviating on something and we're like, oh, let's call it this. But my friend Rob, who I used to hang out with when I first moved to California, he literally he would just want to get together on Friday nights, like a small group of us would get together, and he would just want to talk about Dyson spheres all Friday night. And we're like, this is what we do on Fridays. And so we came up with this phrase, Friday night Dyson sphere. And that's an homage to my friend Rob, who's like, he probably wouldn't want me to say, but like Rob is I think 50 now. So this goes way back. And yeah, that's funny because I'm literally talking to him tomorrow about a new idea that he's spinning up. And yeah, these traits, what's interesting is that people ask us often what we do at 1517 and how we do it. And it's tough because I think people want us to hand over a checklist and be like, if you just check these boxes, you too will find Vitalik Buterin, you too will find Lord Deming. And the thing is that it is, to your point about intuition, it's something that also has a felt sense component to it. It's like you can hear, like in the hyperfluency, it's not just that they're fluent, it's that they're passionate and that you hear that passion and that you could listen to them talk all day about a thing. And in fact, I had like experiences of that when I was younger. And, I wasn't thinking about the fund or what I was doing, but I remember I went on a date with this guy who was super passionate about beer. I hate beer. I am so not interested in beer at all. But the way that this guy talked about beer, I was like, I could listen to this guy talk about beer all day because he was just so into it and he loved explaining it. And it's like that kind of trait is something that we look for at 1517. And so we came up with our own lexicon because one, like no one else had done it. And like we had a sense that the words people were using already just didn't fit what we were really looking for. And we have found that when you have your own lexicon for something, like language creates things in reality, and it's a way of transferring some of that knowledge and also working with our team. And one of the things that we're always evolving, and so I can't wait for like Paper Belt on Fire too, because it's like, okay, we've got some new phrases now. One of our new phrases is dog on a leash energy. And it's like, that is this very visceral sense of like, that's who we're looking for. So dog on a leash energy kind of means exactly what it sounds like. A dog on a leash who's like pulling. It doesn't need food put down in front of it. It doesn't need water. It needs the leash to be cut. And that's what we're here to do at 1517 is be like, wow, do we feel that like tension for this person of like, God, they're so ready to go, but they don't quite have either the permission or the resources to do what they need to do, but they're the one to do it. Like, the people who are like the slack dog on a leash, we're like, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do there. And my view of humanity is actually that all of us start as dog on a leash energy and we get resigned over time, often through things like the school system. And so my true belief is that like every child who comes out is like gifted in some way, and it tends to get like tampered down by systems. And the ones who happen to like kind of make it through and not get that sense of resignation. I'm not entirely sure like what is happening there, but I'm glad that it happens. But I don't make a distinction between like these are the genius people and these are the not. For me, it's like these are the resigned ones. These are the ones who got really beat down the system, and like somehow these ones were able to retain some sort of spark of joy that like keeps them going. But I think like that spark is actually inherent in being a human. And like, it's just such a blessing to run programs that can help keep that spark going and sometimes ignite that spark for people. This is why we run our teen camp. It's called 2E. It's for 14 to 18-year-olds. And it's to help keep that spark alive and also expose them to things that might spark them that they've never seen before. So we do like a deep tech field trip day where we will go around to our companies and let them see like, look, this is 2 people in a garage getting started on fusion infrastructure. How crazy is that? Like, and show them what is possible. just to get like their imagination going and show them like, hey, you know, you can get started with less than you think. And, you know, a company can just be two wily people cracking on ideas and seeing where things go. So yeah, that's there was one other, there's a no one. Oh yeah, we call it alchemy. There's a trait, a new one. So like I said, we're always thinking of these things. We love when people can take resources, the resources we give them, and almost change those resources into something magical. And the idea is that they're like stretching those resources in a way that you would think would be unimaginable, or it's like so creative. You're like, oh wow, how'd you think of that? So like a couple of our founders at this company, Luminar, they're really great. Mia and Bruno are fantastic people, great friends, started this hydrogen storage company together. And as they were building the company, they needed a particular material that you can buy off the shelf, but I guess it's pretty expensive to do that. And so, you know, they nerded out and figured out that apparently in some old Toyotas, you can like get this material. So they went to the junkyard and are like, you know, pictures of them like legs hanging out of cars, like getting this material from the junkyard, you know, paying the junkyard for that, you know, some minimal price, and then walking off with it. And that to me is alchemy. That is like, wow, they could have bought that material off the shelf and like burned a lot of runway doing it and probably still like gotten some traction and like done what they needed to do. But they're like, okay, how do we do this like better and more creatively and in an interesting way that also like helps us retain some cash? And that's what they did. And so this is a new trait that I love to look for. And so that we call alchemy.
And it's almost as if you mentioned this like point around lexicon, and I'm sort of just reminded because I recently was reading David Deutsch's Beginning of Infinity,
Sure, of course.
and he talks about the aptitude of it was in the development of different mathematical notations working towards the universal mathematical system that we currently have, and the idea that there was I guess what would have been mathematicians at the time who were inventing like special purpose languages that weren't for the purpose of like universalizing. It was I think Deutsch puts, I hope I put this correctly, but they were sort of inventing something for their own purpose, and then it sort of acted as a stepping stone on the way to something that ended up being universal. I mean, Deutsch's opinion is, I think that it's not like an idea. It's like an idea is an autonomous thing. Like a truth can be an autonomous thing, and once it's revealed, and so it's kind of intriguing to me that you are developing your own lexicon because maybe there's some area of like high potential research, like high potential individuals or high potential persons research that maybe isn't as what would you say, like it's sort of obfuscated because there's only really one system that you might be able to elucidate those traits within.
Right. You know, this kind of reminds me of, you know, some of the like multiple intelligences theory and things like that. It's like if you put genius into the category of only having, you know, high math ability, you're going to miss out on all the people who are like geniuses in like movement, for example. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me that like when you pull something into language, there's like a new reality that can kind of happen. And we see this too happen, you know, in sports. Like when someone beats the record for something, all of a sudden everyone knows like, well, it's possible. It is possible to beat this record. And apparently it seems fairly common that then like the next year, more people will beat that record because it's like, oh, well, this is just like normal. Maybe that's the standard now. And I think there's something about those things becoming like true in one's consciousness that like really like spins it into reality quicker.
Yeah,
and this is interesting that you say this because this sort of leads into some of our current thinking about what we're seeing with like young people in tech, which is that like so with Fund 4 in particular, we're seeing this convergence of our two theses. We have our like non-degreed thesis of working with wily people who've never stepped foot in college or dropping out of college or whatever that may be. And then we have our like sci-fi scientists. They might be PhD'd up, but they've got to be working on like sci-fi tech, something really crazy for us to get past our filter of like, all right, well, you don't fit our non-degreed thesis. But what we're seeing is a convergence of this, of non-degreed people who are working on sci-fi tech. And one of my theories about this is that, you know, today's like younger 20-year-olds, like early 20s, have grown up watching the new tech greats like build things like Palmer Luckey and Dylan Field and Laura Deming and Vitalik. Like they've literally watched them as 20-year-olds do this. And I wonder about if there's something about their brain being sort of bathed in that as a norm, that it's like, oh yeah, you can do hard things. And like we've seen this. And I also think there's something too about Gen Z and Gen Alpha around like purpose and meaning is more important than ever. And being able to run as hard and as fast as you can at that. But it makes me wonder about like, you know, did the people who are now in their like, I don't know, mid 30s, like saturate the next generation to know like, okay, yeah, you can do this high jump. Like this is actually possible for you. And now it's across like a cultural spectrum instead of just the elite high jumpers knowing about it.
And it kind of leads into something I wanted to ask you about, because you do work with these like frontier individuals, and it's something I've been thinking about with a lot of the what would you say, like existential concern around the developments of like large language models and this kind of thing. And it leads to this question I have about imagination. And one of my concerns is in the world in which the artificial intelligence or machine can do every form of art or something that you can do, but better. How do you see these young people staying motivated and imaginative?
Sure. Gosh, I think it's interesting. I mean, I have sort of a different take on this, like, especially when we're talking about things like art. I think there's gonna, and I think it's starting to actually, I'm already seeing it happen now. I mean, even like on Twitter, it's like, you know, there's someone who does like really incredible needlepoint on Twitter, and she has quite the following. And it's like, okay, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought needlepoint Twitter, or especially like 5 years ago, like when people were really getting into Twitter over the pandemic. And I think that there's something about that. Sure, maybe this like system can like mass manufacture some sort of art or like a craft for you. But I think people are already starting to care about that it actually came from soul, that it like came from individual consciousness and not collective consciousness. I think there's something really amazing about these LLM models, because in some sense you can think of it like collective consciousness, or at least like some level of embodiment of that, which is really cool. But there's also something really special about the individual nature, you know, and I think, I really hope that people are opening their eyes to that. Yes, having these deep conversations with an LLM is very gratifying, and growth producing, and you can learn so much. And having a best friend who's human is so important, because of that like individual connective layer. So one of my funny like hot takes right now is that I think by like fund 6, like we'll be funding artists. We'll be like, oh cool, like the hot commodity, like, you know, we'll be like, oh wow, this painter's really amazing. Or we're supporting the Atelier Monsieur team who's building, you know, like these large scale sculptures. We're working with them to support them to move to the US. And like, to me, this is our first instantiation of like that thesis that we might be living into in like 2 more funds, like, which is like 6 years down the line. So I'm like I'm very curious about these things. But to go back to it, you know, young people growing up today and having access to these models, what we're seeing in our teen camp, and of course we're looking at a very like specific, and the teens that we select for are both very geeky about whatever their thing is. And it doesn't have to be science and tech. And in fact, I love when it's something different. It's like we have a young man who's really into like medieval weaponry, like that's his jam. And I'm like, sweet. And we're seeing these young people growing up and like using LLMs and getting to the frontier of knowledge faster, but still wanting to make their own contribution to it, and still wanting to like learn the craft of something, because like the craft is important. And I think we're going to keep seeing this more and more, that like, and like becoming a geek over the last 10 years has been so cool. And I think that geekery really translates into craftsmanship, where it's like, okay, are you really, really good at your craft? Whether that's, engineering, or whether that's that you can make your own chainmail. Like, I think those two classes of people resonate with each other in a way that maybe they didn't before. And so I'm like very curious about, for the people who aren't just leaning on LLMs as like, hey, I'm resigned and this is going to do my work for me, what they will be able to use these tools for. I've been thinking about this a lot too, with like, I've been reading, and it's fine, it's taking me way too long to go through this trilogy, but whatever. I've been reading C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, and he's such a beautiful writer. Like he's so like deep on the inward experience. And it makes me think like, okay, if he had used like an LLM assist, like, would he have written the same way? Would he have even thought the same way? Any sort of tool makes me think a lot about like the use of the tool, and is it helping or hindering us? And I think, in this world of AI, there are ways that it's going to accelerate things, and for some, it's going to like pull us back. And I think there's something about like, I think maybe part of people learning in general is just like, how do we use tools and what do we use them for? And like, what is like enabling flourishing and growth and like access to deeper and richer experience? And what is like taking us out of the game and like is more towards that resignation piece?
It's almost like, wow, there's a lot in there. I mean, what's coming up for me that I think is intriguing is like, where is that generating energy coming from? Is that,
well said,
individual instantiations of archetypes? Is that, because you mentioned, right, you have this collective compression, right, of LLMs,
right?
And then, how do you cultivate that imagination so that it doesn't fade away?
Yes.
Because you're right that these systems can't. A while ago, I wrote an essay around the idea that like, in part of it included this idea that it's like it's taking longer and longer to get to the frontier of experience and knowledge. Hence why like you need a PhD to do whatever in order to do whatever. But the fact that you can ask the the computer or the model, you can get that sort of perimeter level discussion, means that you can get to the frontier a little bit faster. So it's sort of, I get, maybe right now we're trying to figure out how do you remain inspired, remain imaginative. And I think art and literature is often a source of that. Like I have this idea that I think art inspires philosophy, which inspires economics, which inspires culture, which inspires economics, which inspires the individual.
Yeah, totally.
So it's trying to figure out those, I guess, larger narratives. And I suppose maybe with what your work is you're sort of at least trying to craft an alternative narrative that says like, if you have this intense passion for something, there is a road to travel in that way.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And like one of the insights we had at the Thiel Fellowship was also that, the first insight was like, hey, what if we give resources to young people? And I think there's a couple of things that are interesting there. One is that like society at large tells you not to give to individuals. It's like, oh, it's dangerous. They'll use the money poorly. It's bad. Like, but I think institutions want that meme out there because they want the money. They're the ones who are like, oh, we are the ones who will take really good care of that cash, no problem. And of course, we see tons of corruption in that area. And for young people in particular, young people are used to maybe winning money as like an award for a prize, but they're not used to being given resources to do the next thing. And that means that if you're winning those awards and prizes, that you probably already had resources to get you started, which means like that those who don't have those resources, the barrier is just so much higher for them like winning those awards and whatnot. So it perpetuates these cycles. And so our insight was like, well, yeah, what if you give resources to young people to see what they can do, instead of saying, holding a carrot out and saying, I'll give you this thing if you can do it. Like, and then the insight was, well, maybe we don't have to give a young person $100,000. Maybe you can actually get them started, and impact even more people, doing a smaller amount. And so we were doing 100K at the Thiel Fellowship. And when Michael and I left, we knew that for our investments, we wanted to do like 100 to 250K, like for someone who was working on a company. But we also had this thought around, and we experimented in the very last year of the fellowship. We would give out $1,000 grant to a young person who came to our event and just told us about what they were working on. And we just like kind of see what happens. And then we carried that in on 1517 to say like, hey, let's give a young person $1,000. It used to be a Venmo payment. I got to call Venmo and be like, guys, we got to get back on your platform. Like, this is good advertising for you guys. Come on. But I think we're doing too many transactions. They didn't like it. But anyways, Venmo, if you're listening, we got to talk. But yeah, like the insight was, if you give young people resources, what will they do with them? And we've seen some really amazing things happen from our grantees. Like, some of it's just on the builder maker side and watching people build incredible things. And then some of it has turned into companies. We have one of our companies that's a Series C company started as a grantee with us. One of our most known companies started as a grantee with us, Mock Industries. We gave Ethan a grant when he was in high school. And then he came back and we were the first check into the company. And it just all started with some tinkering and, a little bit of cash to say, hey, what can you do? And now it's really cool. Like, there's so many different fellowships out there these days. In fact, we host an event that's coming up at the end of June called Renaissance Reimagined. And 2 years ago, I started this and said, I want to get fellowship leaders together to jam on ideas, because when I was running the Thiel Fellowship, there was no one to jam with. Like, there might be a fellowship, but it was for postdocs who had their PhD. Like, there was no wily young person fellowship. Like, we were that fellowship. And now, I like to use the adage, like, let 1,000 fellowships bloom. And there's lots of them. Like, there's tens or hundreds of them at this point. And we like to bring those leaders together, because I think fellowships have really great incentives in terms of giving people non-dilutive capital to try interesting ideas. And to your point, like, I'd love to see more fellowships in arts and things like that, because those things influence culture, which influences economics, and it just like keeps spinning into itself. And yeah, like, fellowships are just like very near and dear to me. And I'm very excited to see like just more of them happen. And, I should probably try to keep some stats on this, but from the first event we had for Renaissance Reimagined 2 years ago to now, like, it's just interesting to see, like, okay, yeah, like, I have the sense that there's more fellowships now, and we've seen some interesting cross-pollination from that event between programs. And we actually backed a founder recently, and I was asking him, I was like, where did we originally meet? And he's like, at that fellowship event. I was running a fellowship at the time. And I was like, what? Like, that's crazy. And he's working to eradicate cancer. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. So I think fellowships are very powerful. And for anyone who's thinking about starting a fellowship, I think what makes a fellowship really amazing is being able to give people the freedom to explore without the, like, by the end of this program, you have to have succeeded in this way. Like we always said with the Thiel Fellowship, it's a 2-year program with a 10-year timeline. Like, we were very clear, the best isn't going to come out by the time they're finished with their fellowship. It's the beginning. And we've seen that to be so true over the last 15 years now.
Yeah, there's so much in there. I mean, there's even the whole gold star thesis, right? Where if you just have the gold star, then that will sort of kill any motivation for the internal work.
That's
and then having that time boxing too can create pressure, and then maybe you won't aim for something. But before we step into sort of the early stages of 1517, I want to pause here at this Thiel Fellowship and ask, like, if you were now starting something within the realm of what the Thiel Fellowship did today. Oh, Danielle, are you still there?
Yep, still here. We had some lag that caught up.
Okay. If you were starting something today on the within the, what would you say, like, not radius per se, but like conceptual landscape of the Thiel Fellowship, and maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be capital, but you were able to remove some restrictions, add some things. What kind of alternative experiments would you run in the vein of the Thiel Fellowship today?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, we're running those experiments through 1517. We have a lot of flexibility. And so one of those experiments was, hey, people need less than you think. And so with 1517, we have our grant program that's called the Medici Project. And it's all about giving young people resources to say, hey, you want to build that robotic squirrel? You want to build a unicycle from scratch? Like, it doesn't have to be a novel invention. It's just about really wanting to build and get better at their craft. And so we're running those experiments right now. And that's something I always wanted to do with the fellowship. Was there were a few experiments I always wanted to run in the fellowship that we essentially run in 1517 now. One of those experiments was, giving people in the whole applicant pool, like, a little bit of money, being like, all right, everybody gets $500. Go use your $500. I want to see what kind of alchemy you can make out of $500. Come back. Let's see what you did with that. Now let's talk about $2,000. Now let's talk about $10,000. Now let's talk about $50,000. Now let's talk about $100,000. Like, because I think it's very clear to me, we would have learned something about, because when you give someone resources to do something, you also get to be part of seeing them play in the field. It's one thing to talk about what you're doing. It's one thing to actually go out and do it. And what we also noticed over time is anybody who ever told us like, oh, 100,000 isn't enough for me to get started. It's like, well, that's because you don't have the right mindset to get started. Like, there's always something that you can do, even when you have no money. It's like, you can talk to people about your ideas. You can try to bring mentors on board who can help you out. There's always sort of a way to move forward. One of my favorite adages is like one foot in front of the other. Like, that's how you get things done. So people who are like, oh, I can't do anything unless like I'm going from here to the moon. In my opinion, it's just not true. So I always wanted to run that experiment. And I really like the big experiment that I never got to run was like, I wanted to like get to our finalist round and like have the whole finalist event and have people meet each other and have mentors interview and all this. And then at the end of the day, have it just be like the lottery where we put all 40 names into a ball, you spin the ball, and then you like pick out 20 names. And then you just see like what happened here. Like, because I do think it's like the resources matter. Like, the resources matter in getting people started. And there's plenty of people that I would have really wanted to say like, oh, like, we could do one more fellowship. I really want to give it to this person, and then just see like what happens when you give this person resources. And I think the first model of like starting people with resources early and like getting to sort of see what they do would have actually eliminated the need for me to want to do the experiment of like, let's make this a lottery and just like see what happens. But I always wanted to run those experiments. And in some sense, we run that first experiment of giving people smaller resources and like going up and up and up over time with 1517 a lot. And one experiment that we did in the fellowship that we've carried on, and I think more programs are starting to get this, is that your applicant pool are your customers. And in your applicant pool are your fellows. And you have fellows that you're not going to select that year, but you're going to select in later years. So you want to keep in touch with them. We started doing applicant events. They were called our Thiel Summits at the time. And in the early days, it was the 20 under 20 Summit, where we get a few hundred wily young people together. And there's nothing like meeting someone who's so passionate about what they're doing in person. And it gave us that opportunity to do that. And I think sometimes people would think like, well, why would you be spending resources on the applicant pool? And it's, again, when you give them resources and you see what they do, and that resource in this case was community building. It was like, what happens when you stir these people in a room with each other? Like, do they do more together? Do we get to know them in a different way? And that's another like thing that we've continued to do with 1517. We do tons of in-person events because we just see over time like, oh yeah, me and so met at this event and now we're working on this together, or we're best friends, or we geek out about this thing. And it's like, that is also a resource. So a resource isn't just cash, it's giving people places where it is encouraged for them to be themselves and geek out about something, and people aren't asking them, what school do you go to, or why aren't you finishing school? It's like very refreshing for them to be in that community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so then moving into the moment, you guys had this, you and Michael had this idea, okay, the existing institutional structure of education is as corrupted as the Catholic Church was in 1517,
Yep.
Leading to Martin Luther creating his 1517 1517 theses. And so that's hence what you named the fund, 1517. So at the start of this journey, you took on a little bit, you raised your first fund, 2015, December.
That's
and right. You were running around, going to hackathons, getting into mischief, and everything in between. And this, when I was reading through Paper Built on Fire, it was as if you were just trying to figure out, okay, what's this new landscape? How does any of this work? And it was really a lot of those sort of unknown, like that unknown territory. None of this has been, fleshed out in some sense. So I'm curious from your own perspective, going through that, did it feel unfamiliar? Did you feel like you had some operating chops from your previous?
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot, like we knew the reason why we ran off and we're like, all right, like, so, and in the early days of 1517, we often use the adage, drive it like you stole it. And we're like, we're driving it like we stole it with like everything we've learned from the Thiel Fellowship. And we're repackaging it in this Ferrari called a venture fund, and like seeing what happens with this. And we, and in that vein, we knew how to like interface with young people and go to events and like talk about what we were doing. And what we also found, which is so interesting, is that when we came out as 1517, people received it in a way that was so different from the fellowship. So like people really liked hearing about the fellowship, but I think there was this sense of like scarcity of like, oh, well, I'm not really going to get it. So that's really cool that they're doing this. It's really cool that this message is out there, but like, I'm not going to be able to be part of that. And when we came out as 1517 and would say things at events like, hey, yeah, in 1517, Martin Luther was, protesting the sale of indulgences, and we're protesting indulgences, that higher ed is handing out at great expense, the crowds would go insane. Like people would just go wild. And they had this sense of like they could be part of this, of like, okay, we have and from the very beginning, we were doing things like the grants and the smaller investments and like helping people get started and the community building. So people resonated with it even more deeply than when we were at the fellowship, because they knew they could it's like they could touch it. Like the fellowship was like, oh, I'm holding it here. It's kind of this idea, but with 1517, it was like, no, you can come right up to the front. Like, let's see. Sometimes they call it the Harry Potter sorting hat, where it's like, we'll meet a young person. It's like, what's the right fit? Maybe the right fit is being part of our community. Maybe the right fit is like getting a grant. Maybe the right fit is investment. But generally there's a right fit. Like there's a place for people to be. And yeah, so like that piece of it was super known to us. We were like, okay. And it was so great to just be able to do things the way we wanted to do them without kind of thinking about like, what effect might this have on Peter, or will he like it or not like it? It was like all of a sudden we could like drive even faster because we could just make decisions and go. What wasn't known to us was like sort of the operations of a fund. So we had advisors who came on board early to help us understand like, what is a venture fund? How does this work? We hired our accounting and legal team. And the thing that makes a venture fund great is having a novel thesis. And we knew we had that. And all the other stuff we knew we could like learn from other people. And, we would have like operations and accounting and legal in the fund to like support us in that. There were lots of questions about, gosh, like, hey, we love working with this person, but we're nervous about if what they're doing is like venture scalable. How do we think about those things? And there have been lots of learnings there over time. And in fact, our learning right now, 10 years in, is this sort of like, all right, beginner's mindset served us super well in Fund One. And like, are we like, if we're arguing too much about like, the market sizing for something someone's doing now because we think we've learned something, like, have we lost the plot? Like if this person really hits all our bells and whistles for like, wow, super wily, dog on a leash energy, showing us that they can create alchemy, like, it's like, we should probably do it. And so that's actually our challenge now, is sort of like, it's always this delicate balance of like, you want to integrate your learnings. And especially as a teacher, I'm like, of course I want to integrate my learnings, but you also like want to make sure you're integrating the right learnings and not leaning into something that maybe that wasn't the attribute that was important and you just think it was important. So
also the the dogmatism, right? There's a risk of generating some sort of dogma, which maybe was, if you look at it as, I don't know if this is a fair characterization, but like imagining the strategic landscape of funding in a Darwinian plane, maybe it was evolutionarily fit a couple years ago, but maybe is no longer the case.
Right. Right. Yeah,
And
no, exactly. It's very true. And like we have definitely had a major something to do with like making entrepreneurship cool. And like, you know, people are out there being like, this is cool. I'm like, dude, this is pain and suffering. Like, that's what it is. And like, that's the most of what you're going to get out of this. Like, and even if you reach fame and fortune, like, who knows if it's worth it? Like, this is really, really, you know, this is like challenging stuff. And it does make life worth living. And it's really hard. And you know, we are constantly sorting out like who's doing this because of cool factor and who's doing this because they have a calling. And it's actually really easy to sort those people. Like it's pretty clear. It just you talk to someone and you can just tell like, okay, they're like oozing this thing. This is really what they've been put on the planet to do versus like, I've always wanted to be a founder and I'm trying to figure something out kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then in your own journey, I remember at one point in Pyramid on Fire, there was sort of I don't know if messy middle would be the right characterization, but it was upon you basically acquiring some level of kind of marking up of your deals. But I think it was you then being squished, crammed down, I think was one of the words, by some other firms. There was one point that quite made me laugh, and it was you, I think it was you looking to buy a tub of Loom and drop ship it to somebody's doorstep.
So mad. I was so mad. Yeah. Yeah. So this was with Peter Boyce, General Catalyst. Yeah, no. You know, investor dynamics are so interesting because one thing I didn't understand when we started the fund was like, we call it the 1517 way because we don't know how anybody else does it because we've never worked at another fund. And so I thought, you know, the 1517 way of like going out and meeting founders and just working with people was how all venture funds did it. I was like, aren't they all hanging out in maker communities? And isn't this how you find deals? Like, because that's how we do it. So it must be how other people do it. Wow, was I wrong? You know, most of the venture community spends a lot of time with other investors trying to source deals and like sort of pluck from those communities, like, oh, what's the thing for me? And so that always blew my mind. But we had this case where the team from Loom, you know, they were becoming the hot company in Silicon Valley, and like they were having the good problems to have of like top tier firms fighting over them kind of thing. And of course, you know, when you're negotiating with a team at the beginning, some of what you're negotiating is like the amount of allocation you have in a company. Some of it's like pro rata, like what will you get to put into the next round to like retain that allocation. And sometimes I think of this like a cake. It's like, all right, we negotiated this cake. And what happened there was, you know, top tier firms wanted to come in and say like, hey, I want a bigger slice of this cake. And not only do I want a big slice of this cake, I want to cut you guys out of your slice that you already have. And I'm always like, what? Like, that means there should be some sort of ramification for like, sure, you can have my slice of the cake, but I get something for that. Well, that's not how the big funds think about it. The big funds are like, we want what we want. You know, the big funds also can like dictate these things because you want a top tier fund to be leading the round and things like that. And at the same time, we certainly didn't want to like get into legal disputes with our teams over things like this, like, you know, and yeah, like we'd rather everything just like work nicely. So we got crammed down. We did not get to enact our pro rata in like subsequent rounds with Loom. And one of these was with General Catalyst with Peter Boyce. And Peter has his own fund now. I wish him well. But we went in for a meeting at General Catalyst. Like, I think we were going to New York. I don't remember who reached out to who. I think they reached out to us. They'd seen that we were coming to New York, and it's all flash and pizzazz. It's all like, oh, would love to have coffee. Come to our beautiful office. Like, yeah. And so we go to the office, and first off, Peter has like another team member come in and sit down with us and try to pick our brains about how we do our community building. And then of course my radar goes off and I was like, oh my God, they're just trying to like understand how we do things so they can try to replicate it. One, you can't replicate my heart. Like that's my soul. You're not going to do it the way I do it because I'm me. And you can feel that, like that is inherent into what we do. So I'm often not nervous about people like stealing our stuff because I'm like, the way someone who's transactional is going to run their event is going to be very different than someone who's relational. But at the same time, I was pissed because I was like, okay, not only did we get crammed down, now they're trying to kind of take our ideas and, you know, note taking and all this stuff. So I just start going hyper general in this meeting of like, oh yeah, you know, we have events, like, you know, just like stuff like that. And then, you know, Peter walks into the meeting and he's all like, oh, you guys are so amazing. And we're so amazing here at General Catalyst. And like, I don't think he knew because it wasn't him who led the deal with Loom. It was another partner. And and Michael opens up and Michael's like, you know, you guys just screwed us over, right? And he's like, oh. And then he started literally doing like the airplane fingers. He's like, who makes the deal? The founders make the deal. And we were like, we can't believe this is happening right now. And so, yeah, I was really, really mad. And after we left that meeting, like, I was like, Michael, I just want to buy like the $1,000. You can literally buy like $1,000 tub of lube off Amazon. And I wanted to send it with a very particular note to Peter and be like, next time you decide to screw us, here you go. Here's a little bit of slip and slide for you. Man, I'm still mad talking about it. And like the audacity to like send in his team member to try to be like, oh, we're just going to see how they do this because we were the first investor in the company. You know, and then I'm going to go in as if everything is just like roses, knowing that they screwed us over. And this is sometimes how the big top tier funds work because they know they can. And now at this point, we've actually gotten much more savvy to this. And I had a founder who had Bessemer leading a deal, and he was like, "Oh yeah. We just like need to sign off on this waiver." And I was like, "Looked at this waiver, and it's like waiving all our rights from the previous round." And I said to the founder, I was like, "Listen, man, this isn't personal. This is business. I've promised my investors that this is what we get. And if I roll over, then I'm not doing a good job by my investors. And they're individuals and family offices. This isn't some endowment that doesn't really care. Like, it's just portfolio theory to them. These are people. And I need to do right on both sides of my fence. I need to do right by my founders and I need to do right by my LPs." And this founder was funny. He's like, "Oh, yeah. You know, we'll always give you what you want. Like, we just need the paper signed." And I was like, I cannot sign this. I cannot roll over. And I just kept repeating, this isn't personal. This is business. And he went back to Bessemer and said like, hey, like, this isn't going to work. And we still had to roll over a little bit, but we didn't roll over as much as what was first put out. And at this point, I think other funds, this is kind of the tough part, is like when we were early, people didn't know who we were or what we were generating as far as value. Now people know that. We've had, you know, Luminar IPO'd, Loom was acquired, Lambda Labs is one of our premier companies, and people are like, oh, you don't want to mess with them because they might send us a good deal, or like they maybe have been the generators of that good deal. And like, so now like we have, you know, we don't have to like argue quite so much when these things happen. And of course, we've also put in like mechanisms and structures to like help support that. But yeah, it was a huge learning in the early days of 15, 17, because like literally like millions of dollars of value were lost because of that. Like, it's like, wow. And we had a great return. Like, we 1x'd our fund when Loom was acquired. And I know it could have been more than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the reason I thought it was so interesting is because reading Paper Built on Fire, like it did read as kind of the part of the anecdote of when you build like a company, right? Where you have these moments of deep challenge and you're just like, wow, like we just have to kind of eat that. Like, and
Yeah. And we say this often to founders. Founders will be like, oh, I'm going to get a patent. And we're like, you're not rich enough for justice. And it's the same at 15, 17. We're not rich enough for justice either. You know, we're not rich enough. And especially in the early days, one, we're not going to sue somebody over pro rata. And two, it's social capital. It's like if you go and you sue a founding team over something, no one's going to want to work with you. So we were not rich enough for justice, and we're still not rich enough for justice. And we would never do those things. But we had to sort of learn, you know, and now we like socialize it with our teams. Like, listen, at some point, you're going to become the super hot thing in the room, and everybody's going to want to put money in. And just remember, we were there first. Like, and just remember, like, honoring your agreements matters over time. And people are like, oh my God, of course. And now that Paper Belt on Fire is out there, we've had founders who have read it, and they'll be in a process of, you know, pitching with us, and they'll be like, and we will never do what happened there. And I'm like, oh, I was like, it's okay. It's okay. I was like, we're working it all out. Like, but it's hilarious how many teams we've had come to us who have read the book and they're like, and we would never do that. I'm like, oh, they did their homework.
So then moving along, as you mentioned, you then had a kind of collection of companies. You had Luminar go public. You then had Loom get acquired. You have Lambda Labs, which obviously right now is a quite big company. And you've raised several subsequent funds. And now you've moved into this new sort of world or program. You've called it the Flux program, where you're basically looking at, okay, well, a lot of tech companies per se. I mean, Luminar, for example, was more of like a traditional technology company where you're building actual hardware, IP, that kind of thing. But you're saying, okay, maybe the software world is not saturated, but like it's sort of I always think of it as like the playbook is kind of sort of figured out. Once you have like product market fit, you just run it and you do that sort of thing. Although getting there is easier said than done. But then you're moving to this more science focused idea. I think the idea was we want to fund garage biosciences. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? Maybe some of the concerns.
Well, one thing, so what's interesting is like, just like we're expanding on our lexicon over time and integrating learnings, like we're doing that all the time with the fund. And in Fund 1, we met a team of, dropouts out of Vanderbilt who are dusting off some old, like, nuclear energy work. We're like, hey, wait a second, maybe now is the time to actually like bring this into market and experiment with it. And we met that team in year like 2.5, 3 of Fund 1. And we said, what would you do with 50K? And they were like, oh, well, we'd start prototyping and we'd move to DC and, we'd start getting going. And we were like, okay, cool. Give them 50K. They start prototyping. They start making good contacts in DC. We ended up investing, again, I think the next check was probably something like 250K. They make more progress. We invest again. And we like got to like very much, and we've done a lot of deep tech investing. Like Luminar is a deep tech company. But like we've sort of like massaged and honed our thinking on like how we do those investments. And we, of course, we do software as well. I'd say 1/3 of each of our portfolios is like B2B SaaS, but then 1/3 of our portfolio is like crazy sci-fi, and another 1/3 is like hardware with a data play. And that's what's been interesting, is that that's been mostly true for like every single one of our funds. And to fast forward the Xeno Power story, which is that team from Vanderbilt, they just raised a $50 million Series B round. Their battery is literally going to the moon. They're gonna like etch 1517 into the bottom of the battery. I'm like, oh my God, we're going to the moon. Like, I need pictures. That's gonna be so fun. And it's just really incredible to see what they're doing. They have 60 employees. I think they're growing the team to like 100 people between DC and Seattle now. And they're just doing really incredible work. And over time, we've thought a lot about this story and other stories like it, of like, okay, we started someone with a small check. And just like we were talking about before, we started with them with a small amount of resources, saw what they could do, came back in, more resources, saw what they could do, came back in, more resources. And we thought, we wonder if we can like wrap this into a program. And this is kind of where the idea from Flux came from. We were actually at a Foresight Institute event, their Vision Weekend, which is a fantastic event. One of my absolute favorites. If people have a chance to go, go. They do one in Europe and one in the US. And we were talking to someone who had basically like left the cathedral of academic science. And he was talking a lot about how, God, there's all these scientists who are kind of locked up in academia. And if only we could save them and get them out. And Michael was hilarious. Michael was at this event and like, Michael was like, yeah, let's do it. Like, let's just start writing 100K checks. And I was like, and like he's saying to this guy, like, and we're all sitting talking together. He's like, okay, yeah, we'll do it. We'll commit like $1 million. We'll fund 10 teams. And I was like, we haven't talked yet. Like, hold on, like, let's see. It was this idea of like, yeah, if we kind of put like an announcement out of like, hey, we're doing this. This is not a grant. We don't have the ability to do like larger grants at 15, 17, but this is an investment in a C Corp, but it is to do R&D work. And if things go really well, we'll follow on with like $1 million and more capital. And if things don't go well, then it was an experiment worth running. Like, we're totally great with things not working out because that is actually the most likely thing to happen. And were we able to help further ideas in science doing that? Yes. It's important to find out questions to hard problems. And it's been interesting. We've run it twice now. And we find that like having a by when date of, okay, this is when you get your application in to apply for Flux, unearths people who might not think about going to a venture fund with their idea, because like, yeah, we're open for business 24/7. We write these 100K checks, we write these $1 million checks all the time. No one needs to apply to a program. But for people where forcing function is helpful to them, this is the place to do it. And we are really encouraging people to send us their biggest, wiliest, hairiest problems and ideas. It doesn't have to be in bio specifically, but really anything. And we named it the Flux Capacitor after an homage to Back to the Future. It's such a wonderful movie. The musical is out there right now. This is kind of funny timing. We had no idea it was going to be turned into a musical. Everything old is new again kind of moment. And actually what's really hilarious is I got an email from someone the other day and they said something like in the first sentence, they're like, I'm in Flux. And like, I'm thinking about my program and I'm like, this person's not a Flux team member. Like, I'm so confused. And then I was like, oh, they're saying their life is in Flux. So like, it's like interesting moment. And so, we have, a bunch of people who are working on all kinds of things from the first batch. Two that I'll mention. One team is called Arcturus. They are working on making a new type of wire instead of copper wires. And they're doing a really great job with this. And like, we love things at the infrastructure layer of like, okay, yeah, wiring, obviously infrastructure layer. They're doing a really, really great job with what they're doing. We have another founder who is working on sometimes what we lovingly call magic band-aids. She ended up taking care of her grandfather and doing wound care for him, which is very extensive, and really hasn't had an upgrade in a long time. And she's making, using material science, making a new type of bandage that actually would like help heal a wound instead of just stuffing it with gauze. It's super antiquated how it's done now. So that's really exciting. We've put out our we put out our application for the new Flux group. We are just accepting them right now, and we have a young woman who is working on DNA storage. Who is working on storage in DNA, like compute storage in DNA. That's a really fun one. We have people working on rejuvenation of the brain. Let's see, what else do we have? We have someone working on refueling stations in space. Sometimes I call this like gas stations in space. I'm like, oh yeah, it's loves in space. Like, of course. That's a fun one. So yeah, we'll be making an announcement soon about the new teams. But it's been really great to like unearth these people, and a lot of them were like, oh yeah, I saw this through Twitter. I saw this, someone sent it to me, while I've been sort of like, okay, sure, I'm in academia, here's what I'm doing. And, some of our Flux people have no degree. Some of our Flux people are all degreed up. We even had people who applied this last time who were from like, big corporate. Like, they were like, wow, I've worked in this big corporate environment for a long time, and I've been creating IP for them for a long time, and I want to break out and do it myself now. And I'm like, that is so cool that we're reaching all these different types of people. And I think this trait, we talk about wiliness a lot at 1517. This has been a word we've used a lot for the last like year, 18 months. And it's like, yeah, these like super wily people, like I'm like, oh my gosh, these two should not be in corporate. Like they should be building their stuff and working in a garage and taking it to the next level.
And it's almost as if the mentality of academia at times, which to my only my limited knowledge is like, it can be a bit of a scarcity mindset, right? Where it's like, okay, like I was speaking to by chance, like a theoretical nuclear physicist a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling me that he was trying to sort of generalize some of the things that they've done with, I think, nuclear physics with regards to high performance computing, but in other areas that are outside of I guess what would be like nuclear physics, because apparently otherwise you have multiple teams building the same platforms, which then is basically multiple duplication when you could just centralize something. And maybe it's when you have that injection of capital with like risk tolerance, which in academia we don't really have I guess I lovingly put like a failure journal. Like, here's what didn't work, everybody.
And everybody talks about this. Everyone talks about like, we need data repositories for what didn't work in these experiments and things like that. And it is incredibly hard to get academia to move in that direction. In some sense, you would think like this was supposed to be the place where you could do crazy ideas, but now it's about carrying on someone's work who's been working on it for 20 plus years. Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, and maybe part of it, and again, I don't know too much about the academic framework, but it maybe is the thought is like you're sort of remunerated in kind of prestige and the ability to kind of publish the work, and obviously that's incredible if you're creating foundational and fundamental research, but maybe
you don't get to publish those things because publishers don't want to take a risk on things that might be deemed as like strange or crazy or discrediting somebody else. So I think there's this like facade of like new discovery and all this, and it's like very incremental.
Because I guess, yeah, it's intriguing. And just going to the whole 1517 story, it's like I look at it as like a parallel system of sorts, where you have sort of the existing structure, which I don't have enough historical knowledge, but I'd be very curious to see how schools and the school system and then the academic system developed over time, because it wasn't as if it was a big structure to start with. It was probably little communities that joined together at some point and then solidified over time. So it would be intriguing to see how that existing institutional structure gets challenged over the next few years.
Right. Well, and I learned something interesting. I haven't dug into the history here, but I heard that like, because one of the drums I've banged on for a long time is like hiring institutions could be doing fellowships and could be doing these things to sort of like work with would-be employees in the future, like earlier and things like that. And apparently in the 70s, this used to happen more often, but there was a pretty interesting court case that happened where I don't know all the details, but it was something like someone didn't get hired and then ended up like suing the employer for not hiring them. And they had their own like assessment process they used. And I think they were saying that the assessment process was biased in some sort of way. And like it may be, that may be very true. But what happened was that set precedent for employers to be able to sue over their assessment practices. And assessment is very hard. Like it's very difficult to do a good assessment. And so then what happened was employers started leaning on the proxy of, oh, do you have a college degree, as a way to keep them from getting sued from, potential employees or like, just people they've interviewed, as a way to like create this barrier between them and the assessment process. And I find that really, really interesting. I've been meaning to dig into that court case more, because that set off, I think, a cascade of like, now everybody needs a college degree because and one thing that I learned working at the Thiel Foundation was just so much about incentive alignment. And it's like, okay, these things came out of potentially employers being afraid of getting sued for something. And then that these structures got built around that in mass. And of course, like there's lots of information about like, okay, and then when the government got involved and said, oh yes, we're gonna you know, fund these schools, you know, and there's different things about like different, yeah, there's all kinds of things that happened, I think, in the 70s in particular that made it so that like higher ed became what it is today. And some of those things were like probably well-meaning, good intent. And then I think one thing as just a society we're not good at is we're not good at thinking about long-term consequences or advances, and we're not good at thinking about infrastructure and large-scale infrastructure. It's like when pipes froze over in Austin a few years ago, I was like, oh wow, we are not good at this. Like we are not good at thinking about change and large-scale infrastructure and redundancy. And I think that's going to be the thing we're going to see over the next few decades is like we're starting to see the breakdown of these things because yeah, like humans can't think of every last thing that might happen. And so how do we build better systems that aren't so intertwined and dependent on themselves? And then what effects does that have on like all of our larger systems?
Yeah, and something else I think within that is we're not as equipped to identify these foundational assumptions which have created constraints. Like
Right.
I'm sort of always reminded of this story about a woman who whenever she made turkey, she was like told that the way that you make turkey is you always like cut off the edge of the turkey and you put it in the oven. So that's how she made turkey for like years and years and years. And then one day her friend was like, why do you do that? Like, why do you cut off the end of the turkey? And she was like, oh, I don't really know. Let me ask my mom. And so then when she asked her mom, the mom was like, oh, I never know. Like, that was just my grandmother who used to do that all the time. So then when she asked her grandmother says, oh, I did that because we had only a really, really small oven. So that was
The oven wouldn't fit it. Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of intriguing, like what like from a software analogy, right? What constraints or what things were chosen at one point in time, but civilizationally speaking.
Well, sure. Yeah, absolutely. No, it makes sense. It's funny. My dad talks about things like that. So my dad's side of the family is Jewish. And my dad's like, yeah, like the kosher rules made sense, like when we didn't have refrigeration and like all kinds of things. And, like, so his sense is like, hey, like maybe we would have made different rules given like new technology and things like that. Like, and these things made sense, to keep people safe at the time. And maybe we would have made different rules, had we had more resources and infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess the challenge also is that as it's also difficult to change a large organism, right? Because you don't know.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah.
And to the point, like there is something important about structure and ritual and like doing things like for those reasons. And it's really challenging to challenge those structures and rituals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. As we come to the end of the episode here, Danielle, I just have, one final, I guess, question or curiosity, which is, where do you see, I guess, the hope or the what would you say? Yeah, the hope for humanity. Maybe I'll frame it that way. With the next coming years ahead, I talked to a lot of people. A lot of people are very concerned about the present case. There's people who think technology is moving too fast. There's people who think technology is moving too slow. And I'm just curious about your head and how do you sort of balance that approaching the world as you do here now that you're in your most recent fund and you're thinking about the world and working with people on the edge.
Yeah, my sense is that technology is moving too slow. I've obviously been steeped in that through Peter for a long time. But it was interesting. I went to the Progress Institute has a conference called the Progress Conference. And they had Steven Pinker speaking at it. And Steven Pinker was basically talking about how, we shouldn't be so afraid because like we're actually moving in like we're moving in the steps of progress. Like we're making X amount of progress per year in all these areas and all this. And I felt so uneasy as he was talking. And I was like, we're here at the Progress Institute conference. Like I expected, like what I'm hearing in my mind is what he's saying is that it's good enough. And I was like, okay, I have to ask a question. And I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, this is Steven Pinker. I'm going to like ask this question. And I got the mic and I was like, hey, like, So are you satisfied with the rate of progress? Like, do you think this is fine, or do you think that like my view is that we could be accelerating on so many things, and things like, to go back to eradicating cancer and things like that, like that should be what we're striving for and moving towards, and not just being like everything's fine. And his exact words were, I think where we're at is good enough. And it killed me. It was just like, oh my gosh, like holy moly. And I think there's something really wrong with that. Like that to me is a message of resignation, of like, oh well, it's good enough. And I have I think that we are accelerating change. I think that we have the ability to do that. I think there are lots of structures that get in the way of sometimes these things happening, governmental and otherwise, and cultural. And I hope some of those barriers can be lifted. And, I know people are nervous about AI everything. And like my theory is a little bit around, it's a bit like when children who have been in school start homeschooling. There's a period called deschooling that happens. And it's a total normal thing. And parents will be like, oh my God, my child is doing nothing. They're just playing video games. And like, I'm nervous. And like, that goes on for typically like a year-ish. And I think it's kind of a boundary thing that is happening of like, okay, well, people say I don't have to be in school and I don't have to do school things, so I'm not going to do them and see how people react. But eventually what happens for people is like they end up going, you know what, I want to do something else. I want to do something in addition to video games today. Or like, I want to dive even deeper into video games, but maybe on like the creative side and things like that. And you see that people start sparking their motivation again. And I think society, like at large, is going to have to deal with this and have to go through a deschooling period, when, AI can do so many things. And I think that period is going to be really challenging to go through. But I think that period is what you have to go through to get to the other side of like creating meaning for yourself, and understanding like, okay, like the world is changing. I'm still in the world. What do I want to contribute and how do I want to be part of that? I think people are very resistant to having to go through that hard part. And I think, people talk about like 20s life crisis, 40s life crisis, midlife crisis, all these different things. I think going through those crises is how you get to the other side. Like it's a developmental milestone. If you don't go through the crisis, you don't get the developmental milestone. And I think we're going through a huge societal moment of that, of like, we're about to go through a crisis, but the other side is that we have developed in a very new way. And it's going to be tough. Like, there are going to be people who greatly suffer through that, because they don't have the like resources to be able to go through that huge shift, or like they don't have like a community or a mindset that will like encourage and help go through that shift. So like, I'm not saying that, oh yeah, it's just all beauty on the other side. Like there's going to be a lot of pain and suffering people go through to get to the other side. And I just hope that people can hold that time period as like, there's something greater. The other question is, I don't know how long that's going to be. In deschooling, it's like a year. We might have to go through like 10 years, 20 years. Like, I don't know what that will be. I think on the individual level, ideally people would kind of figure out like, okay, the world is different. What's my place in the world? What does it mean to be a meaning-making machine in this world? And what do I want to add to that? I would hope that would take like a couple of years at most, but because it's going to be en masse, it's going to take longer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Went through this too. It's like people very much went through this during COVID of like, what does it mean to live in this world? And I think we're going to be gearing up for another time period that's really going to like shake that foundation for people very deeply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess just being fluid maybe in that time period. And I guess my worry is the devolution into like mindless scrolling or doom scrolling or these types of things as resistance.
Happen. I mean, it's already happening. We're already there. People doom scroll a ton. And there's this question of like, can people get through the other side? There are, of course, to your point, many questions about so many things are literally engineered to be addictive. And as humans, I think we are dealing with like mass addiction of like technology and social media and things like that. You know, and there needs to be, I think, sort of more education like that. My family, I come from a family where addiction runs pretty rampant. And so a couple of years ago, I said to myself, you know, I don't think I'm better than someone in my family who's an alcoholic. Like, I just put my addiction on, like, I was doing the scrolling thing a lot. And I took, as soon as I thought about it, like addiction, I became disgusted. I was like, wow, I'm disgusted with myself because this isn't like better than, you know, drugs or alcohol. This is just different. And then I took like all social media off my phone, and like when I travel, I'll throw Twitter on my phone, but otherwise I keep it all off because, like, yeah, I just know that my own wiring is such that I'm able to like get really sucked into that, and like, you know, like had to rescue myself. I had to take myself out. I was like, I don't want to be hacked by these things anymore.
Yeah, and that's, I suppose, where the individual awareness and that growing sense of self-knowledge, which is the process of living, I suppose, comes from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Danielle, for joining us. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with, a message, anything like that?
One message, just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Like, that's how you go the distance. And lastly, like, I love to hear from people if anyone wants to reach out. I love email. That's like my processing brain. That's the ops person in me. So just Danielle at 1517fun.com. And I love to hear from people about really anything that they're doing. I actually have a whole Twitter thread that has been pinned for years about how to send me a cold email. It's really fun because I tell people, like, hey, if you have like a pet or a kid or a plant you like include that in the message, like, because I love to get to know people as they are. And then I know if there's a picture in this message, this person like is actually meaning to get in touch with me, and it's not like a spammy thing. So it's been an incredible filter. But yeah, I love to hear from people when they're making, when they're thinking, when they're creating, and it doesn't have to be because you're a founder.
Definitely. And yeah, I mean, we met at a hackathon and just kind of kept in touch. And so
That's
it's
right.
and part of your community and going to different San Francisco events and things like that. So highly encourage. All right. Well, Danielle, thank you so much for joining us and for.
Yeah. Thanks, Robert. This is really fun.